In this section, we're going to learn about the new Keyframe animator, which takes a step further into how much you can control your animation, and especially when you deal with multiple values. So for this, it's best to start with setting up the animation values. We're going to set a struct animation values, curly braces, and this is where we're going to plan what we're going to change. So for example, I want to change the positioning. So var position, and this is going to have a default value using a CG point because it can hold the X and the Y. And so we're going to set it to 0, 0 by default. And of course, you can go and set just the X or the Y, but I find it easier to control the positioning by setting both at the same time. Next, we're going to set the scale, and we'll set to 1.0 by default. With this, we're going to apply to a simple circle, and we're going to create that right after the image before the content. So circle, and you're going to see that right here. Now we're going to set a background by using fill. This is specific to shapes. So we can use thin material, and then we're going to set the frame size because otherwise it's a little bit too big. So I'm going to set it to 100. Right now you cannot see it because it's behind the content. So temporarily we can set the offset Y minus 150, and it's going to be right here. Before the offset, I want to continue styling, so I'm going to use an overlay and set a border by using a circle, which is going to take the same size, and then apply a stroke on that circle to just get the border. Now, that stroke, I can color it using dot secondary, which is, again, adaptive to light and dark mode. And it's also using the vibrancy so that the color is a little bit more vibrant against different colors in the background or a material. Then I'm going to set an overlay again, and this time I'm going to add an SF symbol. So image, parentheses, system name, and it's going to be photo. Then I want to make this bigger using a font, large title. So the way that I want to do is that when I tap on the download icon, this is going to jump just like on the Mac. When you download something, it just jumps from the content to the dock. So I thought this could be an interesting animation to study. So let's add the keyframe animator. After offset, I'm going to set keyframe animator, and you're going to see that it's very similar to the phase animator. So now we have the initial value, which is the animation values that we have set earlier. So animation values, parentheses, and then we have the trigger, which we're going to set later. So I'm just going to delete this for now. And then we have the content. As you know before, we can just press enter, and these are the values that we receive. So we're going to start with content and then value. Similar to the phase animator, we're going to use the value to apply to the content. So let's reference the content first, and then we're going to apply the offset so that we can use the position value. So the offset is going to have X, which is going to use value dot position dot X, which is a CG point, and then Y, value dot position dot Y. Then after offset, we can use scale effect because we also use that type of value, and then we're going to apply value dot scale. So straight away, you can see that we are applying different types of effects at the same time, and we didn't need to set a bunch of conditions. Next, we're going to set the animation timing. So far we have the animation values. We just need to set how those values are going to change over time. For keyframes, we're going to set a value in, and this is where we are going to organize each of those values and how they change over time. So we're going to start with keyframe track, and then here we're going to specify what effect that we want to change, what value. In this case, we're going to start with the position, and for the content, just press enter, and this is where we're going to set the animation timing. So let's start with the more popular cubic keyframe. So this is the timing where you can have easing, and so we're going to start with a bunch of options such as the duration, the value, and also the different options for each of those keyframes. So right now we have cubic and spring. We're going to start with cubic, and we're going to apply the value for position. And if you remember, it's a CG point, so it's going to have X and Y. I'm going to start with 100, then Y is going to be minus 100, and then I can customize the duration to 0.5. As you can see, we're already seeing some animation that is repeating by default. This is what we got from the face animator as well. And just as you expect, you can also set a trigger. Now, if you want to set another keyframe, we're going to add another cubic keyframe or spring keyframe. So I'm going to make this quick. Command D to duplicate that line of code. And now we have a second one. It's using the same value, so I'm just going to change that to 400 and then 1000. So what you can see is that it's jumping up and then goes down afterwards. And I can also change from a cubic keyframe to a spring keyframe. So you can see that there's a bit of bouncing going on. And also for spring keyframe, I can add spring and make it bouncy. So I can really customize the animation that I want, and I can look at the different values that I can enter for each of those keyframe and really customize the timing of my animation. Now let's do the same for scale, and we're going to set the keyframe track and then set dot scale, curly braces. For scale, I'm going to set the cubic keyframe, and I'm going to set the value first, which is 1.2, and the duration to 0.5 as well. Now you can see that as it's jumping, it's going bigger in scale, and I can add another cubic keyframe as well, and this time going back to 1 and set duration to 0.5. So that's how you work with Keyframe Animator. As you can see, you can have more control over the different animation values and the timing for each of those values. And you can add as many keyframes as you want and customize them separately, including the different option for spring, cubic. So those are definitely different options for your animation that you can play with. So now I'm going to set up a trigger in which when I tap on the download icon, it's going to animate instead of doing that by default and repeatedly. So what I'm going to do first is to remove the offset. I don't need this anymore for testing. And now it's just centered within the image. And also I'm going to set an animation state. So going back to the top, I'm going to set state var is downloading is equal to false by default. And I'm going to scroll down to find that download icon. So here you can find that on the square and arrow down. And at the very bottom, I'm going to set, first of all, on tap gesture, and then is downloading.toggle. Now the thing is, I also want to be able to animate this using symbol effect, which I found to be really awesome and easy. So I can just add symbol effect before the gesture, and I'm going to set it to bounce and set the value to is downloading. Now what's going to happen is that when I tap on the icon, it's going to bounce every single time, which is really cool. At the same time, we're going to trigger this animation. So let's scroll back to the top to find the circle where we set the keyframe animator. And this is where we're going to set right after initial value, we're going to add comma, trigger, and then it's going to be is downloading. So now it's not going to start the animation anymore by default. It's only going to do that when I tap on my awesome download icon. How incredible is it that in SwiftUI you have so many of these animation techniques that are baked right in the default library, which is SwiftUI. So using the traditional animation states with default transitions, or SF Simplify with symbol effect, or phase animator and now keyframe animator. And we're not done, because in SwiftUI 5 we also have something called metal shaders. And this is going to blow your mind because it's going to allow you to add really unique effects and filters to your images and UI and animate the whole thing. So let's learn that in the next section. I'll see you then.